Okay, great. Welcome, folk. What a privilege to do this workshop, because actually it allows me and Mary to dig deep into the university qualification that we have just been putting together and are putting through the University of West Scotland. And so some of the materials you'll see in this workshop have not been seen by any other human apart from me and Mary. Not even the university yet, who on Tuesday said, we're going to accredit you anyway, you're fine. We'll see whether that comes true. But it allows us to go deep into principles about bias and equity and sustainability. And so as in all workshops, hope you got your colour pens, don't get bored. We will be using Jamboard and different things, but you know, doodling increases retention more than about 60%. Make sure you doodle. There's nothing rude about doodling. And I'm going to start us off really with telling you a bit about places work. And meantime, we will, when we get there, take over your screen with a set of slides that will be the interactive slides for the workshop using Mentimeter. So last December, I was sitting outside with another colleague and inventing the idea of the word Places Work, which is the company that I now also run. And that came out of this sense that actually workplaces are really essential. And when we were doing our research on branding and thinking about it, we did find out that what was it? Facebook was one of the few organizations who have trademarked around the word workplace. The others are all people who run buildings that hire themselves as workplaces, and there aren't that many of that. But actually, we think it's about local community development and making your local community, your democracy, your dogs, your family, everything else work, and making placemaking happen. And that's actually the future of the planet, is placemaking. And our workplaces need to fit around that. And I think that there's a lot that's kind of simple in that. What we've been doing this year as a company is we have been helping organizations in depth become 100% hybrid capable. So the first one was the Carnegie UK, which is a social research organization, very well known, obviously. People used to move to Dunfermline when they got their job with their family because it was so important. Actually, nowadays they don't. They got trained in a very short amount of time from me and Mary, and we also did consultancy to their rooms, to quickly help them realize that the IT firm should have really put in a 10-meter cable, not a 5-meter cable, and you need a second camera there. And why the hell are the people are going to sit down the other end of the room? They're not going to sit down where the IT people think they're going to sit down. They're going to sit near the windows because there's windows onto the park. Anyway, that's the kind of consultancy that I do, helping people realize how humans work, which is strange because we are all strange. Then me and Mary worked with Scottish Renewables, which is a European-wide organisation, but it's Scottish Renewables. But of course, not every piece of kit that is being deployed in the renewable sector in Scotland is from companies that are in Scotland. So yes, you've got the SSE, massive Great American conglomerate, very active in putting up wind farms and running a fair bit of our energy infrastructure in Scotland. And you got Scottish Power Renewables, again, a very big part of the renewable sector. But actually, Scottish Renewables, they run 15 types of forums or even more. You'll see it on their website. That includes offshore wind, onshore wind, and then onshore battery wind. Sorry, onshore wind, the battery department has its own forum because there's currently a fight with the UK-wide government about the feed-in tariff and the battery regulations and the specifications. for how onshore wind uses batteries. Anyway, lots of little bits of detail. What they really wanted from us was, how do we share all this stuff? Now, pre-pandemic, they thought they knew how to chair, because you would invite everyone to Glasgow, which is where they've got a lovely buildings, great. We were there, glass walls, great kit, wonderful. We brought our own kit to supplement their kit. But really, we were training them in how to chair in a hybrid format, because it requires different sorts of flat planning skills. And likewise, we're helping buildings convert to 100% hybrid in the voluntary sector in particular, because, well, Hilton, I was going to say Hilton and places like that, they can do it themselves. They don't need the help. But if you go into the Hilton hotel rooms at the moment, you might think, no, maybe they do need places to work, because they're getting it wrong too. There are a few organisations that I know who have converted their rooms correctly for hybrid. But so far I haven't seen more than 2. I was impressed by Glasgow Meeting House, but that's for Quaker meetings, which is not our subject area, although we'll talk about that a bit. So, how are we going to run today's session? Mary will introduce herself as we get going into, is the other group fine, Mary?
Yes, I think so. All good.
Great.
Yeah, I'm a body in 2 rooms, trying to keep my mind in one place. So if I look vacant for a moment, then that's fine.
So do you want to show your screen, show the Mentimeter?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to do it? Is that easier?
No, I can do it. I will share.
So what we'll start with, folks, is we do actually always, the first slide. Yeah, this is going to be the spring conference, Quakers in Business, where we're all sat in different rooms around the country, but all joined up. And that's the core image that I created. We are very keen that meetings have rules, and that actually being quite clear about the fact that your session, your meeting is going to be run in a certain way is a really good way of starting any meeting. And so for this, it's going to be collaborative. We're going to use tools, things you've learned to expect from this conference. Okay. We find it very important to start off with, well, what are hybrid meetings in the first place? Because we come across lots of people who say, well, we're already doing it, or no, I've done it, and they're talking about their experiences, and that's fair enough, and that's true, of course, because their experience is true. But do we mean that they have one person who's remote, or do they have half-half, or did they have the other percentage? I'm not trying to work out mathematically, but like, what were we talking about on the spectrum? Or was it like that first image, many rooms joining up through one meeting? What I hope it was is one audio space so that people can hear each other. And what I hope it was one visual space so that people can see each other. But we know they wouldn't have all been able to smell each other. And actually, what do we really mean? So there are lots of terms that are going to change over the next 5-10 years about this. We tried to talk about it as blended meetings and have managed to influence quite a few people on that, because a meeting is a very complex blend of things. And then it is more complex, is the reality. So you take pre-pandemic, where few of us had experienced webinars, and then pandemic, lots of us have experienced online only, of course, because we were locked in. And of course, we have historical experience of in-person meetings. And the way of chairing those things can feel quite different, and is a bit like the formula of 1 + 1 = 2, rather than it is just as simple as the others. It definitely is one bit different and requires more planning. And that may remove some, I think.
Oh,
because we're going to be talking with you about what you want from the session just now, the workshop. And so if you take a screenshot of that, or on your phone or whatever, you're going to participate in Mentimeter. So if you hold your phone up and you've got a QR code thing, you can do that, or you can go to menti.com and put in the code on whatever device you're going to use for the rest of the workshop. And we can help anyone who gets stuck.
I'll just put the link in the chat as well, just in here. So it's,
I can see that one person's already in there giving us love hearts. Very nice. And then what you could do is, these are post-it notes, and in essence you can put as many post-it notes as you like, but what I really want to know is, what do you want to get out of today's session? So that could be that you frame a question about equity and sustainability, or it could be a question about hybrid meetings, or it could be a hope of what you're going to get out of today, this workshop. It will be anonymous unless you put your name on it, which is fine by us. And you can submit as many times as you want.
And always, if you can't access Menti for any reason, then you can put things in the chat here, and we can transfer them over, or we can sort of add your points to the Menti if Menti's being a bit clunky for you.
Which is one of our rules. Never do a workshop that's complex without having a colleague, because what if someone needs it put in for them?
Oh, I like Miles's top tips in priority order. you just want the headline top tip.
I think that's almost my tip number one. I think to have a colleague. It's more stressful right now to do it. And too much stress. You go on, sorry.
My menti.com's just saying, please wait for the presenter to show the next slide.
Oh, so if you've participated, then hopefully if you come back to the Zoom screen, you can see my screen share where I'm sharing the results that everyone else has added in. So yeah, it won't let you kind of move to the next question until I let you move to the next question.
Right.
Yes, we've set it up to go at the presenter pace, not at the audience pace, unlike Jamboard. But you can tell us other things, we can put them in if you want.
Yeah.
Of what else you want.
But I think we'll be looking at that idea of inclusivity in a bit more depth shortly. So hopefully we can answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
So excellent. I think hopefully there's nothing there that we weren't planning to cover, is there, Duncan? Which is always good.
No, it's brilliant. Curious about best practice in virtual meetings. That'll be interesting, because I mean we're going to talk about hybrid, but of course I actually think, in my experience, is that our practice trumps all formats of meetings. And that's my experience from working with others, not my arrogance, I hope. That actually when you train folk up to the level of doing hybrid meetings, they become better at all meetings. And there is vision articles that I've written that are on my website, Duncan Wallace Associates blog website, that show some of this evidence that actually practice around meetings improves in general when you have to face hybrid meetings, if you face them well. But we're really at the foothills of this change, folk, as you know. So the biggest challenges right now are, this is from 110 different businesses over a while, and it's a Wordle. So you can see that the words that repeat become the larger ones, and that actually it's a mixture of two things is what's in that word cloud, which is technological stuff is a key challenge, and dynamics is the other challenge. So it really is right at the heart of the social technical system is what we're talking about, and that's what my expertise is about from the Tavistock Institute. That actually all meetings, of course, are a social system and a technical system, and beware a manager who doesn't understand that, although they don't have to understand the words, but like, you know, it's very complex being a manager. Okay, so those are the biggest challenges. What you can tell us now is what challenges you're experiencing. So again, it's a Venn diagram. You get to pin the tail to the donkey, no, the pin on the map of, and the 4 that we've got. This is a conglomerate one built on the workshop we did with the Institute of Directors in August, and you can see what they thought. The technical glitches was one of the key areas, but actually the overlap between the social challenges and the technical glitches is the most numerous. Visual challenges being the second most area, but add your own pin for where you want. And I think it's interesting that audio problems, is part of it, but is less by a bit, but it's the social challenges. And that's more and more what we're finding ourselves in the territory of, which is the inclusion, the feelings, the sense of invitation to be fully part of the meeting, the intentionality around the lunch, all of those things.
I think as well, it really speaks to a lot of the things that have been talked about so far in the conference, doesn't it? About that sort of feeling of feelings of distance that can be created, and that togetherness is something that's really important for effective meetings and effective collaboration. And so if we start to feel that sense of disconnect and distance, then that's the really key thing. And whether that is a result of the technical issues or just a result of the fact that we aren't in a shared space, then those are the really big challenges to try to overcome.
Yeah, in the chairing stuff that we were doing with Scottish Renewables and the work I was doing with the Institute of Directors and with NHS chairs, the ability to read the room as a phrase, of course, that's a massively complex skill as a leader of a meeting. We know many of you are Quakers here, not all of you, but what we talk about in clerking and why a clerk exists and often has co-clerking and our systems around that as Quakers is reading the room and feeling it and forming a minute. I mean, no wonder Quakers are knackered. Half the time. It's like, these are very high level skills, and going from agenda item 1 to agenda item 2, and do we agree the minutes? That's piss easy. Reading the room, that's the complex stuff. Reading the room when you've got different screens, okay, got to get used to that. So this slide is it's changed over the year. We've been doing these maturity scale ideas since the beginning of this year, asking where are you at on running hybrid meetings, and where's your organization at? And I picked one of these slides, but actually at the beginning of the year, most people were in number 1. They're just beginning to think about it, and a few people were in number 2, exploring it as a company or whatever. And some folk were saying that they had some structure around it, and as you can see in the slide that's there, the folk that we're working with most recently, some folks said, well, actually, we're pretty good, we're pretty integrated. I can tell you what I think is not happening from all the work I'm doing is clear guidance and policy about when to hold it as hybrid, when to hold it as face-to-face, and when to hold it as virtual. So you can imagine a company should have a policy, like a travel policy. I mean, like, it's not rocket science, guys. You know, like, why is there not a policy yet? Because we haven't worked it out yet. Because we're only in 2022, and everybody in 2022 is feeling a similar gaggle of feelings about wanting to go back to the office or travel or see my colleagues or give them a hug or not give them a hug or whatever. And so there is so much complexity in 2022 about whether to do face-to-face only or whether to do in person, whether to do online only. And so the last thought is, well, actually, it's going to be hybrid. And we're literally picking up masses of tiny bits of work and problem solving from the perspective of, hey, you know that thing you were going to facilitate tomorrow? You couldn't bring along the kit because it's going to be hybrid because 2 of our staff were off with COVID. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay. And it's like, you know, the consultant and facilitator that isn't ready for that is going to struggle over the next year. Because actually, or it will just now settle down, and the expectation of consultants is that they can do it. Hence, Miles is here, you know, or whatever. You know, it's like, it makes sense that you expect someone to facilitate you, so you expect them to be able to run it hybrid. And then you ask, and whose kit are we using? Yours, mine, how? What? How's that going to work? You know, and that's where it all becomes, okay, maybe we're not totally ready. Maybe we haven't planned the room.
I think this has put a really, really important point in the chat of, you know, it being done badly, and I think that's the case for a lot of people just now, is that it's happening, but it's happening badly, and so people are feeling really frustrated and really resistant to it because it's hard, and if you're not feeling prepared, or if you haven't had the training, or if it's just not become the norm yet within an organization, and so everybody is really, it's kind of grating on everybody because there is this feeling of frustration that you're not able to have meetings in the way that you used to have them, and you're not getting the things that you want from a meeting. And I think something that Duncan sort of spoke to at the start is that, you know, meetings are about outcomes, and so if you're not achieving what you want from a meeting, it doesn't matter how you're holding it, whether it's in person or hybrid or remote. That's the purpose, and if that's not being achieved, then that's where it gets really sticky. So hopefully we'll have a look at some of the advantages and how you can get it right, and the ways that we can improve the situation.
And go on to the next slide. And we're about to get you to think from a one meeting perspective. So as in, we encourage each of you to think about a particular meeting. In my preference, it would not be a Quaker meeting, but obviously you might want to pick a Quaker meeting. Just think about one meeting, and what Mary was saying about outcomes is entirely important here. What actually you're really trying to achieve in that, from that one meeting, maybe not in that one meeting, maybe from it, by bringing from people together allows them to connect, and therefore later on they can really work out what they want in the meeting, but let's bring them together first. So why would you choose a hybrid meeting? These are principles, and these are top tips. And Miles, you were saying about, you know, please put them in order, the top tips. There's still a cell job going on as a top tip. And actually, there are many routes within the cell job to really think about what the advantages are for that particular meeting. So the fact you can do increased sharing and collaboration, and what you've then put in the meeting is recorded because you've used a Jamboard or you've used something, increases the likelihood of collaboration if you've built in recording into the meeting in some way. And that's a bit like a Quaker principle of having a minute. And why do Quakers have a minute in our business practice? Miles, I don't know if you know, but we take the minutes during the meeting and don't leave the meeting. We have a Quaker rule where we don't leave the meeting till the minute is agreed. And the principle is based on 400 years history, which is that if you were at the meeting, you certainly know what was agreed because you were there, because you had to wait till the minute was written and agreed. And if you weren't there, you should have been there. So go figure, you're accountable. Just read the minute. And actually, Quakers have been quite powerful in history. And minute is one of our biggest amounts of paperwork records. But it saves farting about loads of emails afterwards. Decreasing cost is interesting as an advantage because there's obviously the travel cost, but there's also aspects about digitalization of work that are interesting here about that. More sustainable only if we look after online health, but more sustainable for planet is obvious because of less travel. And increased flexibility, well, I was just saying, how many meetings are suddenly becoming hybrid meetings? How many conferences in this autumn of 2022 conference season have suddenly become hybrid? Not as many as there would, because conferences are a harder thing to become hybrid. But how many meetings have suddenly become hybrid? Masses. And as Vidya said, without really having any training or planning or whatever. But improving accessibility requires onboarding folk, being patient, helping them like we did at the beginning of the pandemic, helping folk get into Zoom, helping people get into whatever. And then it's about planning from an individual level. And so really thinking through the accessibility of that particular meeting. So you've got your pens out, you're thinking about your own meeting. And we're now going to ask you to think a bit further by telling you some stuff about, well, actually, Mary, you do this one because you put this one in.
Yeah, so I think we'll break down some of those different factors, thinking about the different advantages that we have, and as Duncan mentioned, from a sustainability perspective, that this was some research that came out from Cornell University last year, thinking about the footprint of in-person conferences, and it's quite a sort of poignant for me at the moment with COP27 happening, and the idea that in-person footprints of conferences could be reduced by 94% if they're online, and that they could be reduced by 67% if they're in hybrid. But balancing that alongside other factors, as we talked about, in terms of thinking about the challenges that we might face. And so I think the first thing that we wanted you to consider when thinking about that particular meeting that you've got in mind. So how would you rate these different aspects in terms of the importance when you're thinking about planning that meeting? What would be your kind of your highest priority in terms of whether you plan that as an in-person meeting, a hybrid meeting, or a virtual meeting? Or whether you hold a meeting at all as well. So yeah, should there be a meeting? And if there should, is that for social, financial, environmental, or sort of effort levels? And how should you hold that meeting? And what would be the things that would influence you most? So yeah, have a vote.
And stick to thinking about one meeting, because there's another exercise coming, and then there's a small group bit coming where you can talk about your particular meeting that you've used as an example for planning for equity and sustainability.
So yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, that environmental is sort of way down compared to a lot of the other factors. So
far, and I mean, I don't mean so far within the workshop. I mean so far within 2022-23. Because I think as well, and we'll hear what the meeting people are talking about, but people have really enjoyed travelling to see folk this year in a different way, because of course the last 2 years. And I think we're heading into going to the office might be warmer.
Yeah, Yeah. But for me as well, it's really telling that the sort of preparation and effort is quite a high one, and I think that's one of the real challenges with running effective hybrid meetings, is that often it does take more, it's more complex, and therefore there's maybe more preparation, but actually a lot of us aren't given the extra time that might be needed, or the extra training that might be needed. And so because of that need for kind of allocating more preparation time, that's a real sort of challenge that we face.
And Fides was saying in the chat, you know, university lecturers, many are absolutely overwhelmed. NHS staff, completely overwhelmed. You know, you think of the industries that are not overwhelmed. Oops, sorry, that thought's left my brain. You know, so actually, we are in a context where there are many industries pretty overwhelmed about the coming out of the pandemic stuff. And the reason for some of the other workshops about bullying and about just algorithms and about presenteeism, we're in a bit of a mess about how organizations function. Now, for me, I believe God is messy, actually, and was never straight up. And that's from my reading of the Bible. I trained as a monk back in the day. I believe theology is messy, and actually we are heading into hyperturbulent conditions if we're not already in them. And the only way of navigating hyperturbulent conditions is staying grounded and simple. So there's a lot there about that sort of staying careful.
And I think that leads really well into the kind of element of equity, in terms of that idea of simplicity. And you know, we've sort of touched on the idea that potentially hybrid meetings might be more accessible or provide opportunities for accessibility and inclusion, but equally there's a real balance there, and this is sort of further research that's come out from Deloitte, which talks about the fact that actually in terms of equity, women are often more likely to prefer a hybrid option in work. However, they feel that also leads to a level of exclusion. So there's a real balance in terms of the opportunity to be able to work in a hybrid, flexible way, which means that people have got a different sort of work-life balance, or able to manage caring or health responsibilities, and things that can actually be a positive aspect of their lives. However, if they're then feeling that because they are using a hybrid option, they are then excluded because they're not in the in-person setting and they're missing out on conversations or being put forward, that this is something that we really need to be quite careful of in terms of the different assumptions. So I think, yeah, so Martin's saying in the chat that
I've just put up a cheeky reply, which is probably best verbalized, that I think that what's going on in the minds of some folk is spoken to there about, oh, surely hybrid meetings is just another iteration like you all managed to do during lockdown. And it's like we all managed to do during lockdown, i.e. without training, without support, without back support on your nice chair, without a computer that really works, without Teams that actually has a bandwidth, and without an economy that actually works, or without a planning time. Oh, but we'll give you a bit of furlough, those who are lucky enough, not like me and Mary. And it's like, is that really how we're running the economy? And the question is that really how we want to run our meetings? And then what's, I think, interesting for us is these pain points, marketing terms, I don't want to switch straight to marketing, but marketing is often based on understanding what is the pain that's going on that your solution fits. And actually, to some extent, these pain points are all pointing to a better future needs to be created, a smoother way of doing this. And it will take a while. But because the pain points are multiple, I think it will force employers. So, for example, actually, I'll not speak for myself. I'll speak for the people we interviewed for the various training courses that we run, right? So, we're running a university course. You might know that we have a 1 hour course and we have a 6 hour course, all online, ready, available on Place to Work website. We also do all this work in live courses and consulting. As part of putting that together, those courses, I interviewed Miles, amongst other people, without the waves behind him, with a different image. And you'll see his video of where he lives on there. And I interviewed several other experts from around the world, and we edited down those videos and used them in various ways. And those experts told us about the benefits, but also we asked all those experts to tell us about the barriers and the problems so that we could be very open about the difficulties. And I think, Martin, the other thing your comment speaks to is we don't quite know whether training is the only solution or the best solution. So we're getting you to do this stuff about bias, but we know that unconscious bias is currently being slagged off by loads of people because it's 5 years old, or 10 years old, or 20 years old if you actually read the literature. And unconscious bias, nobody likes it because it says unconscious. And of course, the whole bloody point of unconscious bias training is the mitigations, not the bias training. We all are biased. What did we just learn with Viv? I mean, like, for goodness sake, give yourself a break. We know we're biased. It's what sort of mitigation helps us be our better selves and plans for the better conditions. Because if you create the better conditions, it lessens the impact of the biases. And so there's this whole myth that people seem to have missed about the unconscious bias training was about the mitigations. And that's partly actually, I mean, I'm a specialist in it. And of course, the companies that some of the companies that created unconscious bias stuff created computers where you can check out what sort of bias you have in a computer algorithm.
So Martin's got his hand up. Do you want to?
Yes, I'm feeling drawn to being a bit of a devil's advocate now on training. As to, it's as if training is the magic plaster solution. I'm what sort of thinking, is there such a thing as a very advanced training that trains people to know how to do things without having to show them in detail or to have the resilience to cope? But not having had the training could be an excuse as well.
Yeah. No, that's really great. I love the devil's advocate approach to your own question in there as well, Martin, because is it accompaniment that people need? Top tip number 1, have a colleague who can handle the strain. Find your way through it together, like we did during the pandemic. Is it, and what do we mean by the word training? Because training has also become bloat to some extent, or as you say, an excuse for not just having a go. And then what I love as someone who trains managers and leaders is it really management training that we just need? Team leading training, how to be a manager, how to be reasonable, how to do a meeting. Catherine.
Yeah, good question from Catherine. And I think that was one of the reasons that we sort of put this in, really, is to do with kind of just it being something we do need to consider is, well, what are the existing biases in our workplaces? Are we conscious of them, and are they the same in a hybrid context, or are different biases being exacerbated, or are the new inequalities? Inevitably, I'm sure there will be, because that's the nature of a sort of changing workplace, isn't it? That as soon as we have a change, then the balance shifts in a different direction for different people. And so having that awareness, I think, you know, that idea of, oh, just because we did it during COVID means we're all doing it. Well, COVID, we learned the hard way a lot of the time by making mistakes, by getting things wrong, and by people having to highlight and say, hang on, you know, I'm being excluded in this situation, or this isn't working for me, or this group of people are being excluded in a certain setting. But because it was an emergency context, we had no choice but to kind of learn as we went. And I think that's the consideration with hybrid, is that it isn't just the same as virtual, and it isn't just the same as in person. So how do we kind of create that consciousness and that ability to sort of step back and say, right, well, what do we need to be aware of to get these things right, to make sure that we're not making the same mistakes that we made either with in-person meetings or with virtual meetings.
So Mary put up that data from Deloitte earlier, and we also know that some of the biases of the past are being repeated right now. So gender bias is being repeated by certain companies, but not all. And one of the things about hope, in terms of, to answer your question with data, Catherine, is that the companies that are led by women are embracing hybrid working perfectly well. The companies that are led by men are not. The companies that are led by men in Australia, for example, this is large data sets. You'll find a lot of it on my Facebook and LinkedIn feeds and stuff, and I write a monthly newsletter. The companies that are led by men are forcing people to go back to the office because that's how they know how to lead. And so you can look at the boardrooms, and you can look at the senior management, and you can look at the big data, and you can work it out. Luckily, we now have so much data in the public domain that you can see how the leadership is creating the problem, not the problem being created by technology.